I sat in the dark, watching them. The camera I had hidden captured every moment, every touch. I watched as my wife, Emily, leaned in toward him, her lips meeting his hands gently gliding over her body. There was a passion in her eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. She looked alive, free, and it should have hurt me. It should have made me jealous, angry, disgusted. But instead, I felt something entirely different. A strange storm of emotions began to swell inside me. Couldn't look away. Every time his fingers grazed her skin, I felt a rush of excitement building within me. I didn't understand why I liked it, but the fact remained, I was mesmerized. There was no room in my mind for the old feelings, no anger, no resentment. Instead, I found something new, something I had never expected to feel, and this confusing mix of fear, curiosity, and pleasure took hold of me completely. This wasn't just an affair, it was something more, and I knew that moment would change us forever. Now, let me tell you how it all happened. I never thought we'd find ourselves here, especially not so soon. Emily and I had always been the couple others admired, young, in love, and full of life. We were the kind of pair people would look at and think, they've got it all figured out. But somewhere along the way, that flame, the one that had burned so brightly between us, started to dim. It wasn't anything sudden. It happened slowly over time, like a fire running out of fuel. The passion that once defined our relationship was replaced by routine, by the everyday grind. And now we were left with silence. Not an uncomfortable silence, just a dull one. We were both only in our early 30s, too young, I thought, for this kind of distance to creep into our marriage. But there it was. We still loved each other. I knew that much. I could feel it in the small things. The way Emily would smile at me across the dinner table, or how we'd sit together on the couch at the end of a long day. But it wasn't the same. The touch that used to send sparks through me was now just familiar. Our once electric connection had fizzled into something more akin to companionship than passion. And then there was the sex, or rather, the lack of it. We weren't the same in bed as we had been in those early years. What used to be spontaneous, wild, and full of desire now felt like an obligation. A chore we both knew we had to check off, but neither of us really craved. I told myself it was normal, that this happened to everyone at some point, but it didn't make it easier to accept. It felt like we were losing something vital, something that had made us. That's when I started to notice the small things. At first, it was just a passing thought. Emily spending more time on her phone, locking it whenever I walked by, or how she'd seem distracted, lost in her thoughts during dinner. I didn't think much of it at first. I trusted her, after all. We had always been honest with each other, never kept secrets. But as the days went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She was hiding something, and I was determined to find out what. One night, when Emily fell asleep early, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I hesitated for a moment, staring at the glow of the screen in the darkness. We'd always respected each other's privacy, never snooped through each other's things. But this time, something inside me clicked. I had to know. Quietly, I reached over, grabbing the phone and unlocking it. My heart raced as I scrolled through her messages, feeling guilty but unable to stop myself. And that's when I saw it. A conversation with someone I didn't recognize. The messages were innocent enough at first. Small talk, catching up. But the further I scrolled, the more intimate the texts became. Flirting, old memories, talks of meeting up. My heart dropped when I saw his name. Her ex, the one guy I never liked, the one who had always lingered in the background. Even though Emily swore they were just friends. I felt a rush of emotions. Anger, betrayal, confusion. But more than anything, I felt numb. I sat there, staring at the screen, trying to process what I had just read. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. Should I confront her? Should I ignore it? Should I pretend I didn't know? I didn't know what to do. But one thing was clear. My perfect marriage wasn't so perfect anymore. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't look at Emily the same way. Every smile, every touch, it all felt different now, like there was something hidden behind every word she spoke. I I kept playing the messages over and over in my head. Flirting with her ex. Couldn't believe it. But instead of confronting her, I did something that surprised even me. I stayed silent. I didn't know why, maybe because I wasn't ready for the truth. Or maybe because deep down, I needed to see how far this would go. I needed to know everything before I made a move. So I started watching her. Nothing drastic at first, just paying closer attention. I noticed how often she'd pick up her phone and smile at the screen. How she'd leave the room to take certain calls or answer certain messages. Every time she'd do it, that tight feeling in my chest would come back, squeezing harder each time. I wanted to demand answers, to force her to tell me what the hell was going on. But instead, I waited. I waited and I watched. One evening, after she left the house, supposedly to meet friends, I made a decision. I followed her. My heart pounded in my chest as I kept a safe distance, my car a few blocks behind hers. My mind raced with possibilities. Was she really meeting her ex? Was it just innocent? Or was it more than that? I didn't know what I'd find, but I had to see for myself. She pulled into a parking lot of a small cafe. I watched from across the street as she got out of the car, glancing around nervously before walking inside. Not long after, I saw him. He arrived a few minutes later, casually strolling in like it was the most natural thing in the world. It was him, her ex. They greeted each other with smiles, and I felt the familiar burn of jealousy flare up inside me. I parked my car and walked over, careful to stay hidden as I peeked through the cafe window. They sat close together, talking, laughing, too close for comfort. The way they looked at each other made my stomach churn. I wanted to storm in, make a scene, demand answers. But I didn't. Instead, I took out my phone and snapped a few photos, my hands shaking. Proof. I needed proof, even if I didn't know what I'd do with it. The next step wasn't something I had planned. After following her a couple times, I realized that this wasn't just a one-off meeting. They were seeing each other regularly, and that gnawing feeling inside me grew worse with every secret rendezvous. I couldn't stop thinking about it, couldn't stop obsessing over the details. But strangely, a part of me didn't want to confront her just yet. It was as if I was stuck in some twisted version of myself, needing to watch it all play out. So I took things further. I bought a small, hidden camera and set it up in our house in the living room, where they sometimes met when I wasn't home. The first time I watched the footage back, I felt sick. There they were, sitting on the couch where we had spent so many evenings together, laughing, sharing memories. But it wasn't just the conversation that bothered me. It was the way they looked at each other, the way Emily smiled at him in a way she hadn't smiled at me in a long time. But as much as it hurt, as much as it twisted my insides, I couldn't stop watching. Each time they met, I'd go back to the footage, replaying every second, every gesture. And slowly, something began to change inside me. At first, it was anger, a deep, burning rage that made me want to tear the whole thing apart. But then, as I watched more, I felt something shift. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was curiosity, a strange, almost thrilling curiosity that I couldn't explain. I didn't just want to stop them. I wanted to see more. I kept watching, couldn't help it. Night after night, I'd sit alone in our bedroom, watching the hidden camera footage of Emily and her ex. I told myself I was doing it to find answers, to figure out what was really going on. But as time went on, I started to realize something I hadn't expected. Something that scared me as much as it intrigued me. I wasn't just watching to catch them. I was watching because I liked it. It wasn't jealousy anymore, or anger, or even betrayal. The more I watched, the more I felt something else. I couldn't describe it, but it was as if a part of me was awakening to something I never knew was there. I found myself drawn to their interactions, to the way they spoke to each other, the way Emily responded to him. It was like watching a movie, only I knew the actors, knew the script, and yet I couldn't look away. I felt like I was on the outside, looking in on something forbidden, something I shouldn't be a part of. And yet, the more I watched, the more I wanted to be involved, to immerse myself in this strange new reality. There was a certain thrill in it, a twisted, dark thrill that I hadn't felt in a long time. It made me feel alive again in a way I hadn't in years. The turning point came one evening, as I sat there watching them on the couch. Emily was laughing at something he said. Her body relaxed, her smile wide and genuine. I couldn't remember the last time she had smiled at me like that, but instead of feeling hurt, I felt excited. My pulse quickened, my hands sweaty as I leaned in closer to the screen. For the first time, I wondered what it would be like, not just to watch, but to be a part of it. The idea stuck with me for days. I didn't know what it meant, or why I was even thinking about it. But once the thought had entered my mind, it wouldn't leave. I kept imagining it over and over. What it would feel like, what it would be like, to be there with them, to join in on what I had been secretly watching all along. First, I felt guilty. This wasn't me. This wasn't the husband I had been for all these years. But then again, maybe it was. Maybe I had just never given myself the chance to explore this part of me, the part that was curious about things I had always pushed away, afraid of what they might mean. But now, with every passing day, with every new piece of footage I watched, I realized that this was something I wanted. And so I started to plan. I didn't know how I was going to bring it up to Emily, or even if I had the courage to do so. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep pretending everything was the same. My feelings for her had changed, but not in the way I expected. I didn't feel betrayed anymore. I felt intrigued. And more than anything, I wanted to see where this could lead. Finally, one night, as we sat together on the couch, I decided to speak. I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. The words hung on the edge of my tongue, heavy with anticipation. My heart pounded as I turned to her, trying to find the right way to begin. "Emily," I said, my voice steady but low. She looked up at me, surprised by the seriousness in my tone. "There's something we need to talk about." She set down her phone and gave me her full attention. "What is it?" she asked, a hint of concern in her voice. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. But then I thought about everything I'd seen, everything I'd felt, and I knew I couldn't keep it hidden any longer. "I know about you and him," I said quietly. "I've known for a while." Emily's face went pale, her eyes wide with shock. For a moment, the room was completely silent, the tension so thick I could barely breathe. "You know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I nodded, watching her closely. "I've been watching," I admitted. "I've seen everything." Emily stared at me, her face drained of color, her eyes wide with disbelief. I could see her trying to process my words, trying to understand how I could have known, how I could have been watching without her even suspecting it. The silence between us grew heavier with each passing second, and for a moment, I thought she might break down, might deny it all or beg for forgiveness. But then something else happened, something I hadn't expected. Instead of panic or guilt, there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something I couldn't quite place. Was it relief? It was as if the weight of keeping the secret had been lifted, and she was no longer carrying it alone. She took a deep breath, slowly exhaling, and I could see her body relax, if only slightly. "How long?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "A few weeks," I said, watching her closely. "I saw the messages, and I followed you. Then I started setting up cameras." Emily closed her eyes for a moment, processing this new revelation. When she opened them again, she looked at me, really looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time. "And what do you want to do now?" Her question caught me off guard. I had expected anger, accusations, but not this. I hesitated, trying to find the right words. How could I tell her that I didn't feel betrayed anymore? That instead of jealousy, I felt something else? How could I explain the shift inside me, the strange excitement that had taken root? "I don't know," I admitted, "but I know I don't want to lose you. And I don't think I'm angry. Not like I thought I would be." She looked at me for a long moment, her brow furrowed in confusion. "You're not angry?" I shook my head. "I was, first, but then I started watching, and something changed. I don't know how to explain it, but I started to understand why you did it. And instead of hating you for it, I started to wonder if there's more to this, if maybe we could explore it together." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and full of meaning. I could see the shock on her face, the way her lips parted slightly as she tried to grasp what I was saying. But instead of pulling away, she leaned in, as if she wanted to hear more, to understand the depths of what I was proposing. "You're saying you want to be a part of this?" she asked slowly, her voice soft, uncertain. I nodded, my heart racing. "Yes, I don't want to just watch anymore. I want us to try this together, whatever it is, if that's what you want too." Emily didn't answer right away. She sat back, her hands trembling slightly as she ran them through her hair. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, trying to make sense of everything that had just been laid bare. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she looked at me again, her gaze steady, her voice calm. "I didn't think you'd ever understand," she said softly. "I thought you'd hate me for what I did." "I don't hate you," I said firmly. "I want to understand you. I want to understand us. And maybe this is a way we can do that." Emily sat there, her eyes searching mine, as if looking for any sign of doubt or insincerity. But there was none. I had never been more certain of anything in my life. After a long pause, Emily spoke again, her voice more confident this time. "If we're going to do this, we need to be honest with each other. No more hiding. No more secrets." I nodded. Agreed. Whatever we feel, whatever we want, we talk about it. We make the rules together. She looked at me, her expression softening as she realized that this could be the beginning of something new for us. Something that could save our marriage instead of destroying it. "I want this too," she admitted quietly. "I didn't know how to tell you, but I've been thinking about what it would be like for us to explore this together, to see what we could learn from it." Hearing her say it out loud, the weight of the moment hit me. This was real. We were stepping into something we couldn't undo, something that would change everything about our relationship. But instead of fear, I felt excitement. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on the same page, like we were about to embark on a new chapter of our lives together. One where there were no more lies, no more pretending. "So, where do we start?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of her lips. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. "We start with him, and then we see where it goes." She nodded, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw the spark return to her eyes, the same spark that had drawn me to her all those years ago. That night, we lay in bed, our fingers intertwined, knowing that the next step would change everything. But we were ready to face whatever came next. Together, the decision was made. We had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Over the next few days, the tension between us shifted. It wasn't the tension of secrets or guilt anymore. It was something else, an undercurrent of anticipation, a shared excitement that we hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long time, Emily and I were aligned, moving toward the same goal. Felt strange, surreal even, but it was real. We both wanted this. I didn't have to wait long for the next step. Emily reached out to him, her ex, and arranged another meeting. This time, though, it wasn't behind my back. This time it was different because I would be there, not just as a bystander, but as a willing participant. As the day approached, my nerves buzzed with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. I had never imagined this for us, never thought that our relationship would take this kind of turn. But now that it was happening, I couldn't deny the thrill of it all. The night finally came. David, her ex, was going to pick us up. It felt like the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter that I both feared and craved. I watched as Emily got ready, more nervous than I had ever seen her. Her hands trembled slightly as she did her makeup, but there was an unmistakable glint of excitement in her eyes. She caught my gaze in the mirror, her smile soft but nervous. "Are you sure about this?" she asked quietly, her voice wavering just a little. I stepped forward, placing my hands on her shoulders, feeling the warmth of her skin beneath my palms. "I'm sure," I said, and for the first time I meant it. I wasn't just saying it to convince myself or to ease her worries. I was ready for this, ready for whatever came next. When David's car pulled up outside, I felt my heart start to race. Emily took a deep breath and squeezed my hand before we walked out together. David greeted us with a calm smile, one that put me at ease in a way I hadn't expected. He seemed relaxed, like this was just another night for him. It helped settle my nerves, at least a little. We climbed into the car, Emily and David in the back, me in the front passenger seat. I could feel Emily's eyes on me, searching for any sign that I might change my mind. But I didn't. I kept my gaze forward, focused on what was ahead, even as my mind raced with thoughts of what was about to happen. The drive to the hotel felt like a blur, time slipping away in a haze of adrenaline and nerves. I could hear them talking softly in the back seat, their voices low and intimate. I didn't need to turn around to know that something was already happening between them. I could feel it, the energy crackling in the air, growing thicker with every mile. I clenched my fists in my lap, fighting the urge to look back, to see what was unfolding behind me. But at the same time, I felt a strange sense of calm. I had agreed to this. I had made the decision to be a part of this, and now it was happening. We pulled up to the hotel, an unassuming place on the edge of town. David parked the car, and for a moment, none of us moved. The silence was deafening, but not uncomfortable. It was a silence filled with anticipation, with the weight of what was about to happen. Emily looked at me, her eyes searching mine for reassurance. I nodded, a small, barely perceptible gesture, but it was enough. She smiled, and I saw the tension in her shoulders ease. We stepped out of the car, the cool night air hitting my skin like a jolt of reality. This was it. We were really doing this. I followed Emily and David into the hotel, my heart pounding in my chest. The walk down the hallway to our room felt like it stretched on forever, each step a reminder that there was no turning back. When we finally reached the room, David opened the door and stepped aside, letting Emily and me walk in first. The room was simple, just a bed, a small table, and a chair by the window, but it felt like the most significant place in the world at that moment. Emily sat down on the edge of the bed, her eyes flicking between me and David, waiting for one of us to make the first move. It was David who broke the silence. He walked over to Emily, his movements slow and deliberate, and sat down beside her. I stood by the door, watching, my breath catching in my throat. I could feel my pulse quicken, my hands sweating as the reality of the situation set in. But instead of feeling out of place or unsure, I felt drawn in, compelled by the intensity of what was happening. This was what I had wanted. This was what we had agreed to. David reached out, brushing a strand of hair away from Emily's face, his fingers lingering on her cheek. She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, and for a moment, I felt a pang of something deep inside me. Was it jealousy, fear, or was it something else entirely? Couldn't tell. But as I watched them, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't upset. I was fascinated. And then, slowly, I moved forward. I wasn't just an observer anymore. I was a part of this, a part of something that was about to change everything. The air in the room felt heavy, almost electric, as if every breath we took added to the tension. Emily and David sat on the edge of the bed, their bodies close, their touches gentle but deliberate. I stood there, just a few feet away, watching it all unfold, my heart pounding in my chest. I had imagined this moment so many times in my head, had replayed it over and over, but now that it was happening, it felt both surreal and incredibly real at the same time. David's hand lingered on Emily's cheek, his thumb gently tracing the curve of her jaw. She leaned into him, her eyes closed, her breath shallow. I could see the way her body responded to his touch, how she seemed to relax, to let go of whatever tension had been building inside her. And then, she opened her eyes and looked at me. That look, it wasn't one of guilt or shame. It was a look of trust, of understanding, as if she was silently asking me if this was still okay. And in that moment, I realized that it was. I nodded, taking a step closer to them, feeling my breath catch in my throat as I joined them by the bed. The tension between us was almost unbearable, but it wasn't the kind of tension I had feared. It was something else, something new, something that excited me in a way I hadn't expected. My hands were shaking as I reached out, my fingers brushing against Emily's skin for the first time that night. Her body responded to my touch, just as it had to David's, and I felt a surge of excitement rush through me. It wasn't just about watching anymore. I was here, part of this, part of something that felt both dangerous and liberating. I didn't know what to expect, but that was part of the thrill. I looked at David, his calm demeanor steadying me, grounding me in the reality of what we were about to do. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. We all knew what this was, and there was no need for words. Emily leaned back on the bed, her eyes never leaving mine as she pulled me down beside her. My heart raced, my mind buzzing with 1,000 thoughts. But in that moment, it all faded away. There was only the three of us, the touch of skin on skin, the sound of our breaths mingling in the quiet of the room. As the night unfolded, everything felt strangely natural. I had expected it to feel awkward, maybe even uncomfortable, but instead, it was freeing. For the first time in years, I felt alive, truly alive. There was no more pretending, no more hiding. Emily and I were finally being honest with each other, exploring something we had both been too afraid to admit we wanted. And David, he wasn't just a stranger to us anymore. He was part of this experience, part of the journey we were on together. I had thought there would be jealousy, resentment, something that would make me want to stop, but as I watched Emily with him, as I felt her hands on me, I realized that those feelings had vanished. What replaced them was something deeper, something more profound. It was trust, a kind of trust one hadn't known existed. Trust in Emily, trust in myself, trust in the boundaries we had set and the new ones we were discovering. Each touch, each kiss, each breath was a revelation. I felt the weight of our past, the years of routine and the slow fading of passion, lift from my shoulders. This wasn't just about sex. This was about connection, about finding something we had lost and rediscovering it in a completely unexpected way. We had crossed a line, but instead of feeling like we had betrayed our marriage, it felt like we had strengthened it. Emily's eyes met mine throughout the night, and each time, I saw something in them that reassured me. She wasn't just with David, she was with me too, and in some strange, unexplainable way, this had brought us closer than we had been in years. I could feel the shift between us, the way our bodies responded not just to each other but to the moment itself. It was like we were learning each other all over again, discovering new layers to our relationship that had been hidden beneath the surface for too long. When it was over, the room fell into a soft, peaceful silence. The tension, the excitement, the nervous energy, it had all dissipated, leaving behind only a sense of calm, of contentment. Emily lay beside me, her body warm against mine, her breathing slow and steady. David sat at the edge of the bed, his hand resting gently on Emily's leg, his face relaxed, peaceful. I looked at Emily, her face flushed, her eyes closed as she rested against me. I had expected to feel something different, maybe regret, maybe guilt, but instead, I felt satisfied. More than that, I felt connected to her in a way I hadn't in years. It was as if the walls we had built up over time, the walls of routine and unspoken desires, had finally crumbled. We had let each other in, truly in, and the result was something I hadn't expected but had desperately needed. Emily opened her eyes and smiled at me. A soft, tired smile that said more than words ever could. I smiled back, my heart swelling with something that felt like love, but deeper, more profound. It wasn't the same love we had started with all those years ago. It was something new, something that had grown out of the ashes of what we had once been. David stood up, pulling his shirt back on, and gave me a nod. I nodded back, grateful for his presence, for the way he had been part of this without intruding, without making it feel like something strange or wrong. He had been exactly what we needed, and in that moment, I knew that this was just the beginning. We had found something tonight, something that we hadn't known we were looking for, and now there was no going back. Emily and I had opened a door, and behind it lay a world of possibilities. We didn't know where it would lead, but we were ready to find out. Together, the morning after that first night felt different. The weight of everything we had been through didn't hang heavy over us like I thought it might. Instead, there was a lightness between Emily and me, a sense of shared understanding that hadn't been there for years. We moved around each other in the kitchen, brewing coffee and making breakfast like any normal day, but it wasn't normal, it was better. I watched her as she poured her coffee, the sunlight streaming through the window, catching in her hair. She looked at me and smiled. A real, genuine smile that I hadn't seen in so long. It wasn't forced or tired. It was full of something new, something hopeful. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were truly connected. As we sat down at the table, neither of us spoke right away. There was no need. We both knew that what had happened last night had changed everything, but it didn't need to be dissected or overanalyzed. We had agreed to this, and now that we had crossed that threshold, the only thing left to do was move forward. Together. Finally, Emily broke the silence. "So, how are you feeling?" she asked, her voice soft, her eyes searching mine for any sign of hesitation or regret. I took a sip of my coffee, letting the warmth settle me before I answered. "I feel good," I said honestly. "Better than I thought I would." She nodded, smiling a little as she looked down at her cup. "Me too," she admitted. "I was worried about what this would do to us. But now, it feels like we've found something we lost." I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine. "We have," I said. "But I think we've also found something new." Emily's smile widened, and I could see the relief in her eyes, the same relief I felt. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were living, really living, and it felt good. Better than good. Felt right. Over the next few weeks, things between Emily and me changed in ways I never could have imagined. Our connection, which had felt frayed and distant for so long, was now stronger than ever. We were open with each other in ways we hadn't been before, talking about our feelings, our desires, our fears. And it wasn't just about the night with David. It was about everything. We had unlocked something between us that had been buried under years of routine and unspoken frustrations. And it wasn't just emotional. Our physical connection had reignited too, but in a way that was more than just sex. It was deeper, more meaningful. We explored each other in ways we hadn't in years, and every touch felt new, like we were rediscovering each other all over again. It was as if the experience with David had opened up a world of possibilities for us, and now we were both eager to explore what else might be out there. One evening, as we lay in bed, Emily turned to me, her fingers tracing patterns on my chest. "Do you think we'll do it again?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. I looked down at her, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "Do you want to?" She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I think so." Felt right, like it brought us closer. I thought about it for a moment, considering the question carefully. The idea of continuing this new journey was exciting, but I wanted to be sure we were doing it for the right reasons. "I think we could," I said finally, "but only if we're both on the same page, if it's something we both want." Emily smiled, her eyes lighting up with that same spark I had seen the night with David. "I think I do want it," she said softly, "and I think there might be more we could explore together." The idea sent a thrill through me, not just because of the physical possibilities, but because of what it meant for us. We were no longer afraid to be open with each other, no longer hiding our desires or pretending to be something we weren't. We had broken through the barriers that had been holding us back, and now the future felt wide open. As we continued to explore this new chapter of our lives, we found ourselves talking about the possibility of introducing new people into our dynamic. It wasn't just about David anymore. The idea of expanding our horizons, of meeting new people and sharing new experiences, excited us both in ways we hadn't expected. We started discussing what it would look like, how we would go about it, what our boundaries would be, how we would ensure that we stayed connected throughout the process. It wasn't just about sex. It was about trust, about communication, about making sure that no matter what happened, we remained the core of everything. Emily and I agreed to take it slow, to make sure we were both comfortable every step of the way. But there was no denying the excitement that came with the idea of trying something new, of seeing where this journey would take us next. We had started something that neither of us wanted to stop. One night, as we sat together in bed, scrolling through profiles online, Emily looked over at me and smiled. "I think we're ready," she said quietly. "Don't you?" I nodded, feeling the same sense of excitement that she did. "Yeah," I said. "I think we are."